Wellness. This is LaShonda, and I am reporting on the literature review that I conducted on systemic racism, the Black church, and Black mental health. Now, I chose to do a literature review because as I was looking into mental health as a general topic, I found a lot of dissected information across the different articles, with none of them bringing everything together to truly define the true problem of African Americans in mental health and why they're not getting care from clinicians, but receiving their care in the church. Now, I chose mental health because the United States is the most mentally disabled country in the developed world, and we're spending $300 billion annually on mental health. So my big four takeaways from my literature review are: number one, the Black South negative perceptions of seeking mental health care. So not only is it perceived to be weak to be mentally ill, but to seek care is perceived as weak. It doesn't align with Black values and Black resilience. And a lot of Blacks think that you should be able to cope with your illness within the context of the Black Christian church. So the second major point is that mental health care is unfortunately racially discriminate. So this is a form of systemic racism. When African Americans go to predominantly white mental health institutions, they're actually being overdiagnosed, they're being undertreated, and they receive generally culturally incompetent care. So for example, an African American like myself going into a predominantly white mental institution, complaining of the distress I'm experiencing as a result of systemic racism, as a result of not being able to get a job because my name is LaShonda, or being fired or being mistreated because of the color of my skin by a group of racist people that I may have encountered, that is actually going to be perceived as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, pathological rage, pathological lying, as opposed to a white person coming in to express similar symptoms: distress over a job, distress over unemployment and financial issues. They would be diagnosed with depression or anxiety. So on top of that, where a white person would be given the correct dosages of medications, an African American person would be underdosed. So be given the incorrect dose of medication. And what this causes is infidelity of treatment, because African Americans are able to sense that culturally incompetent care that they're receiving. And unfortunately, because African Americans aren't going to clinicians at the rate of whites or Hispanics or Asian Americans, they're not able to develop the cultural competence that's required to change the way they deliver care. So it is a bit of a conundrum. The third point is that racial discrimination is the unique predictor of mental illness in African Americans. Discrimination impacts no other race, no other ethnicity the way it impacts Black people and Black Caribbeans. 90% of African Americans and Blacks in the United States experience discrimination, and this impacts them and presents itself as PTSD. It reduces self-worth, it reduces self-identity, it challenges the cultural norms, the foundations upon which they've been raised, and find themselves feeling secure. Rogers actually found that racism alone is the predictor of depression and anxiety in Black women, which is so interesting. So the fourth point that I want to leave with you guys is that because of systemic racism, because of these fears that the Black community has of seeking care within the clinical context, the burden of mental health falls on the Black church. And the Black church is a staple to public health because they've put in programs for HIV, diabetes, hypertension, and other chronic illnesses that have helped the Black community. The problem here is that the needs of mental health are invisible. Clergy are not equipped to recognize mental illness symptoms. They're not equipped or authorized by the law to even treat. They're not able to get the proper medication. And so seeking care within the Black church outside of a referral context is actually more detrimental. Now, studies have found that people who go to church more actually have a buffer against mental illness. So the more I go to church, the less likely I am to develop a mental illness. But once you get a mental illness, the church is not the place where you should be seeking care, because it actually encourages and facilitates isolation from the very buffer and the support system that you would have. And the other issue is that the care provided in the church is mostly self-directed. So one example from research is that African American adolescents, while they don't see the value of mental health care professionals, so seeking professional care, those that are suicidal prefer to receive their care in the church. But the counseling that they get is self-directed. So they're again left alone, and clergy are not able to recognize suicidality. So it actually facilitates suicide ideation. So the suggestions are that African American churches or the Black church and mental health come together and collaborate for the good of the Black community. So what this means is that Black churches would have to open their doors and allow for training of the clergy and also for education of lay members. So during sermons, during Bible studies, during health fairs, they would have to have mental health professionals come in and discuss what exactly do you look for in basic mental health disorders that are common: depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, how to refer someone to mental health professionals, and also how to cope with a family member that may be dealing with mental health issues, because it will need the support system. So what this does is this creates sort of like a Rolodex of information for Black churches to which to refer, because they're not referring at the rates that they should be referring. So we want to get Black churches referring. We want to get mental health professionals culturally competent, and we want to educate the African American community so that they can understand that despite the mistreatment of the past, Henrietta Lacks, Tuskegee syphilis experiment, slavery, that clinical mental health is the greatest asset to them to overcome these mental health issues. Have a Merry Christmas. Thank you.